It's a great pleasure to welcome and introduce today's speaker, Professor Vasant Shinde. Professor Shinde is a well-known teacher and a researcher of archaeology. He started his career almost 4 decades ago as a teacher at the Deccan College, which is not too far away from here in the same city. And over the years, he has guided a large number of students, and the number is really large, over 50 students at master's level and over 30 students at the level of PhD. And many students are still continuing their PhD work under his guidance. Dr. Shinde also later on served very important positions at Deccan College. He was the Vice Chancellor. And currently, very recently, he has actually moved to take up another position in Gandhinagar. There's a new institution which basically is his idea, and he started this work just about 6 months ago. And this is for the cultural heritage, the archaeological heritage across the western coast of India. So this is called a National Maritime Heritage Complex, developing various strategies and policies to basically protect the sites on the west coast of India. So today, he's going to talk to us about some of his recent exciting work on the genetic basis of discovering the truth behind Aryan migration. A lot of theories have been put forth, and finally, it was the genetic evidence that nailed it. It actually attracted a lot of media coverage, and 2 landmark papers were published early this year. And after those papers were published, we realized that it was nice time now to actually hear directly from him about how these discoveries were made, because the work actually spanned numbers of years, though it just got published. Professor Shinde has, as I said, a very long career history, and he has been one of the leading archaeologists from India who have basically taken Indian archaeology to the frontiers of the rest of the world. So it's really nice to have him here today. It's our pleasure to welcome him again. And I leave the dais to you now. Professor Shinde.
So very good evening. Thank you, IISER, for inviting me here. I thank the director of the institute, Sanjeev, the other faculty, and the students. I'm happy that one of my colleagues, Professor Sonal Kulkarni, also is here. Now, friends, you have been hearing about the research that we have been doing, and it has generated so much heat, in fact, in the country. Now, before I begin, in fact, I would like to clarify certain doubts that have been raised, in fact, in the media. One doubt was that, many people have said that perhaps this is politically oriented research, which is not true, in fact. We being an academician, we never do that. But let me tell you that this particular research was started, in fact, way back in 2006. And right from the beginning, in fact, I was very much interested in understanding the composition of the human population, in fact, during the Harappan times. Who are the Harappan people? There are different doubts, in fact, different theories. So I wanted to really understand this particular issue, and the only way we can resolve this issue was that to get the DNA from the skeletal remains. Now, before this particular excavation, the site of Rakhigarhi is located almost in the middle of Haryana, rather in the middle of the what is known as the Saraswati Basin. And this is the largest Harappan city, almost double the size of so-called largest Harappan city of Mohenjo-daro. Mohenjo-daro is spread over an area of 300 hectares, and the Rakhigarhi is spread almost 550 hectares. So huge site. Now before this, in fact, I excavated the largest cemetery of the Harappans at a site called Farmana. And we excavated nearly 70 skeletal remains at that particular site. But our methodology, in fact, went wrong probably, because we were waiting for these scientists from abroad, from Japan and Korea. And they were to come and sample the skeletal remains. So we excavated all the burials at one at the same time. And they took almost 2 months to come to India. So we kept them open for almost 2 months. So in that particular period, in fact, there are a lot of rain, and because of the vagaries of the climate, probably the DNA completely slipped away. But suppose we had found DNA that time, and we had published maybe in next 2-3 years, if at 2010-11, then we could have published the same results as we have published now. So it is wrong to say that it is politically oriented. The second objection is that from one skeletal remain, we have DNA from one skeletal remain, very strong DNA. How we can make so many hypotheses, so many conclusions? We know the limitations, of course, the data is very small. But I will tell you the significance of this particular data. Why this particular data, though from one skeletal remain, why it is so significant? But the conditions are so poor, in fact, conditions for the preservation of the DNA is so poor in that region. The soil is acidic, and the cemetery is located in the field, and farmers use a lot of chemical fertilizer. So that has badly affected the soil composition there, and that has affected the preservation and conservation of the skeletal remains and the most important data, in fact, the skeletal, the DNA data. So we could not succeed. But then we came in contact with the Korean scientists later, a different group from the University of Seoul National University Medical College. They have got perhaps one of the finest forensic science department in the world. And they gave us some guideline, how we can proceed. They said that you have to take proper precaution. I'm going to show you, of course, how we have done that. So you have to take proper precaution. And then, excavate one burial at a time. Don't excavate all the burials, which we are intending to do. So excavate only one burial at a time and finish the entire procedure, excavate it, properly document it, and immediately pack the samples and send to the laboratory for further maybe cleaning and further sampling. So this is what we did, in fact, at the site of Rakhigarhi. And here we excavated 61 burials. We did the entire, all this, this entire procedure for all of them. And then, once they were in our laboratory, then we started, cleaning them and started extracting samples. So we got only samples from 5 different individuals. And the DNA in 4 individuals was so poor, in fact, the signature was so poor, in fact, we were not able to sequence that at all. And ultimately, we were about to, leave this effort, in fact. We thought that, perhaps we will not be able to succeed. And finally, we got very strong DNA from one individual. She's a woman around 35 years of age. And there, in fact, we got the final DNA. What we did now, our approach was simple. We wanted to do, in fact, in entire procedure in India. CCMB was our partner. And they did everything. In fact, they extracted the samples, they did the analysis, sequencing in their laboratory, and we were ready with the results, in fact, maybe a couple of years ago. But then we thought that suppose we publish that result, perhaps we'll be criticized from the from different parts of the world. Perhaps they will say that you are biased, maybe your methodology was wrong, or maybe the approach was not right. So we thought that why not to involve some of the best scientists, in fact, in the field. And that is how we involved the Koreans and the Harvard laboratory, David Rich laboratory. Perhaps he's the best genetic scientist, in fact, in the world. And let me tell you that the lab that he has established this lab only for sequencing the samples from the Harappan sites. And now, of course, he has expanded his studies now further. So it is very long procedure. And it really took a lot of time, in fact, for us to get the right samples. And then, we took proper precaution. And once we had the results from all these three different groups, then only we have published our results. And finally, these results have been accepted all over the world by the scientific community. So what is the importance of this particular sample? We cannot really talk about the composition of the Harappan population, even within Rakhigarhi also, because Rakhigarhi was such a big city. We really cannot talk about because there may be different groups. One sample is not really enough for that. Also, we can, because the Harappans were spread, in fact, in different geographical zones, different ecological zones. They are there, in fact, in Rajasthan, in Punjab also, parts of Gujarat, up to Maharashtra border. And in Pakistan, they are there, in fact, in Sindh, in Balochistan, and also in the Punjab province of Pakistan. So we know that, there were different groups. Probably they spoke different languages also. There was a lot of variation, in fact. It was a heterogeneous population during the Harappan times. But the sample that we have analyzed, it talks about the ancestry of all of us, the ancestry of the Harappans, and the same ancestry, it has established the ancestry of the South Asian people, a very distinct ancestry. And from the Harappan times to the modern times, this same ancestry continues. You'll be surprised, we did sampling of the modern population, in fact, almost from all over South Asia. Nearly 3,500 samples were subjected to this particular studies. And people of different groups, in fact, of different religions. And what is surprising is that in all the population, maybe from Andaman Nicobar to Kashmir, and from Afghanistan to Bengal, all of us carry the Harappan gene, Harappan ancestry, which is so strong, in fact, nearly 60% Harappan ancestry is present in all of us. So in true sense, we are the descendants of the Harappans. So this continuity, it is very important. And because of this particular evidence, now we can certainly challenge some of the earlier hypotheses about the migration of people, movement of the people from different parts. It was always thought that most of the developments in the Indian subcontinent, right from maybe domestication of plant and animal, setting up of the maybe village life, then city life, also introduction of most of the sciences and technologies, basic sciences and technologies, that was done by the people coming from outside, not by the local people. We never believe, of course, being an archaeologist, because we have been generating so much data. So I was convinced right from beginning that there is a lot of indigenous impact elements in this. But there were different hypotheses, different arguments impact in this regard. So now in these studies, we have used 3 different sources, not only one genetic source in fact. We also have used, I'm going to show you some of the archaeological data that we have excavated, how we can see the beginning and the development, gradual development. In genetic, of course, also we have that particular evidence, continuity. And recently, in fact, on the 1st of October, in fact, we published one more paper on the facial reconstruction of the Harappan people. 2 individuals, in fact, we had done for 5, but 2 individuals were published, in fact, in one of the topmost journals, Anatomical Science International. And here, in fact, when you look at the facial features of the Harappans, they look exactly like the modern people, in fact, of Haryana. I'm talking only about the site of Rakhigarhi. Some people, in fact, at Rakhigarhi, at least, they resemble, the modern people, in fact, the modern Haryana people, in fact, resemble the Harappan people also. So these are the 3 different, sets of evidence that we have. And on the basis of that now, we are challenging, some of the earlier hypotheses. And we want to make sure that, the new data that is generated, new scientific data, now that should be now included, in fact, in the textbook. Because otherwise, we have been teaching wrong history. What we have done, in fact, we are not changing the history, of course, but we are certainly trying to correct the wrong notion of the history that is given. So first I will talk about the 2 papers that we have published. Let me also confess that some conclusions that we have drawn, we are not really happy about that, particularly about the Indo-European language. We thought that it has come from outside, maybe up to 2000 BC, with the influx of the people coming from outside. But now, we are rich, and, in fact, we are writing one more, supportive paper, in fact, in this respect. So there, we have completely different views. I'm going to speak about the views, different views that, we are going to maybe publish shortly. So what this, the science paper, first paper that was published, now it clearly mentions that genetically, the steppe introgression in South Asia has not happened until 1000 BC. Furthermore, mixing with steppe was gradual and not sudden. Thus rejects the invasion or the replacement of the local South Asian with the steppe population. That is one of the important take from this particular paper. Then steppe have arrived to India and mixed with the local populations and exchange their genetic material but not the ancestry and also the knowledge and culture. Suppose people had come from outside, certainly they would have brought their own material culture here and implanted here. We don't get any kind of that evidence, in fact, anywhere, in fact, in the Indian subcontinent. Right from the beginning of the settled life, which goes back to 7000 BC now, up to the development of the Harappan culture, continuous process. The same process or the cultural process was transformed into Harappan culture. And then, of course, after Harappans, of course, there is continuity. So we can see the continuity in fact, in their material culture also. Of course, right from the beginning of the settled life here, people were in touch with people from outside South Asia also for the trade purpose. They were getting a lot of raw materials from outside. So we know that some raw materials come from Iran, some has come from Oman, some has come from Afghanistan. So naturally, there is some lot of maybe interaction between the population of different regions. And we are also genetically also we are getting mixing of the population at different intervals. But at no stage, in fact, the South Asia ancestry was replaced or was broken at any stage. So there is a continuity that is very important. We also observed that there was a great deal of variance due to differential mixing with diverse local populations. The increase of steppe in Swat, in parts of Pakistan, is probably due to much concentration of the steppe population at that region after 1000 BC. We are also ruling out a large-scale spread of farmers with Anatolian roots into South Asia. This is based, of course, on our genetic studies. The centerpiece of the Anatolian hypothesis that the movement of people from West brought farming into the region, and with it, the Indo-European languages. Since no substantial movement of the people occurred, this is a checkmate, in fact, to the Anatolian hypothesis. The second line of evidence in favor of differential steppe mixing was observed as we have included 140 present-day South Asian population groups in this study, and only a handful of population is showing a remarkable spike in ancestry from the steppe. The other paper, of course, some of the data that we published in Shell paper was not included, in fact, in the science paper at all. So this is a new data that we have from the site of Rakhigarhi. Now the Rakhigarhi samples we found out that the Harappans were not carrying any genetic signatures from Iranian-related ancestry. It was always thought that Iranians are maybe responsible for the formation of the ancestry in South Asia. The Iranian early farmers, that was the term used by some of the scholars. This is extremely fascinating and indicative that agriculture in South Asia was invented and practiced by the indigenous population. And we have very strong archaeological data for that also, which I'm going to show to you also. This sets aside the previous belief that farming was brought by Neolithic Iranians. It is also evident that significant movement of the Harappans was toward the Central Asia. Very important. For the first time, we are reporting out of India theory. It was always believed that people came from outside first, and then, of course, there was some kind of reciprocal movement happening. But actually, the Harappans began to go outside India first, and then, of course, there was movement happening. Because, we have compared with some skeletal remains from Central Asia, from Turkmenistan. There is a site called Gonur. And in Iran, of course, there is a site called Shari Sokta. And we have, those sites also are contemporary to the Harappans. They also have produced a lot of skeletal data. So we have analyzed those skeletal data. And surprisingly, we find some Harappan-related ancestry in them, in both, in fact, in Central Asian population, at Gonur at least, and also in the Shari Sokta population. And we do not find any, steppe maybe elements or Iranian elements, in fact, in the Harappan population. So that, substantiates our hypothesis that the Harappans began to go out first. So out of India theory is now getting momentum. Our genetic results indicate that the Vedic knowledge was indigenous and not brought by the so-called Indo-Aryans. I'm going to show it, if the time permits, of course, I'm going to show that also to you. With these results, we are also corroborating that Harappan civilization was one of the glorious and oldest civilizations in the old world, and proving that the authors or the custodians of the first civilization were indigenous South Asians. Furthermore, most of the South Asian population are carrying Harappan genes, including those who are raising doubts about these studies. Now, what happens, in fact, around maybe 12,000 years ago? The hunter-gatherers, in fact, split into two groups. One group came to South Asia, and one went to Iran. And since both of them have common, maybe origin, common ancestry, the early farmers of Iran and the first farmers of South Asia, they share some common ancestry. But then, the Iranian farmers, of course, got mixed up with the Anatolian farmers. But here, in fact, in South Asia, we were developing a distinct, ancestry. And here you can see that, very distinct ancestry was developed. And this ancestry has been identified from the skeletal remains that we have studied. Now, the last section, in fact, of the human, maybe culture was spent, in fact, in the hunting-gathering stage, a very lengthy, in fact, from 2 million, almost from 20 lakhs to almost, 12,000 to 13,000 years. They were, in fact, moving, in fact, from one place to another place. We do not have much evidence about the population of that particular phase. And it is believed by most of the scholars that maybe the origin of the human, in fact, took place in Africa. And from there, in fact, they started maybe dispersing, moving in different parts of the world. But we need to substantiate that. We need to have proper evidence for that. And then, of course, from here onward, from the beginning of the settled life, 7,000 BC, up to the modern times, we can see the continuity, both in fact in the material culture as well as in the genetic aspect also. So there are different stages of the development, maybe formative stage, proper maybe agricultural development stage, agriculture stage, and then further evolution, in fact, in the beginning of the urbanization, in fact, at some stage. So that is the gradual process for which we have strong archaeological data, in fact. So earlier it was thought that people came from West Asia particularly, because it was thought that perhaps West Asia has the early date for the origin of the settled life. But now, in fact, we know that maybe in all these 4 different regions, in fact, in China, in Egypt, Mesopotamia, also in India, now the beginning is almost simultaneous, in fact, in all the 4 different regions. So it is going back to almost 7,000 BC in all these. And then, of course, the local people were evolving gradually, developing their own material culture. There, you can see here, in fact, the Harappan region shown in red, called Melua. Melua is the word, in fact, which is found, in fact, in the Mesopotamian text. And historians, archaeologists have identified Harappan region as the Melua region. And then, of course, there are regions like Magan and Dilmun mentioned, in fact, which are in the Gulf countries. And then, of course, you can see the area of the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. The area, in fact, that was occupied by the Harappans was much larger, in fact, compared to these other civilizations. And they, of course, all these 4 different civilizations, 3 different civilizations, in fact, they had proper, very close, interaction because of the trade. This map gives you an idea about the spread of the Harappan civilization, in fact, in the Indian subcontinent. And some of the important sites, like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, these are the type sites. And then, of course, we have a large number of sites, in fact, on the Indian side. Of top nearly 2,000 settlements that we have discovered so far, nearly 1,500 are located, in fact, on this side of the border, and only maybe 450 to 500 located in Pakistan. And we have some important sites like Rakhigarhi, of course, is one of them. Then the other important city was the city of Dholavira, which is in Kutch part of Gujarat, and then Lothal and maybe other places. So the main concentration, of course, was between the Indus River and the Saraswati River, which is called today the Ghaggar-Hakra River. And we are finding, in fact, large number of sites, in fact, between these 2 regions. It is not that only the Harappans were located. Only the Harappans had the settlements, in fact, in the Indian subcontinent. But the entire Indian subcontinent was occupied. Outside the Harappan region, of course, there were maybe the early farming communities. We term them as Neolithic farmers or the Chalcolithic farmers. So on both, in fact, on the eastern periphery as well as on the western periphery, we have a number of these communities coming up. And all of them, in fact, had a very close interaction, close trade network. Now, coming back to the beginning of the the settled life. Now, what you are seeing, in fact, here, in fact. Now, this is the man-made mound, in fact. This is what we call as the habitation site. In fact, most of the habitation sites are in the form of this type of mounds. And in these mounds, there are different levels. and in different levels, in fact, we get different material culture. And we identified, we excavate that material culture properly, we identify that, and we provide the proper sequence, or we give the entire history of that particular place. So this site, in fact, this is called the Mehergarh site in Pakistan. It is exactly on the Bolan Pass in Pakistan. And this site was excavated by a French scholar called J.F. Jarij. And he has found, very strong evidence about the beginning of the settled life there, the introduction of most of the technologies, and then of course there is a gradual growth in fact in the technology as well as in the material culture at the same site. So same people were evolving constantly. So that is the kind of evidence in fact we get at this particular site. So what you are seeing here in fact are some of these structures. Maybe the structure, the superstructures have gone, only the foundation portion is left. But the early structures were very small, flimsy, and then of course there's a growth, there's a gradual growth in fact in the structural activities also. These are the people who started the domestication of animal. We have large number of bones in fact for both the bones of the wild animals as well as the domesticated variety of the animals. So they started this particular process, and the same people in fact started the domestication of plant and various crops. So here you can see the actual the impression of the barley and wheat, which is these are the physical remains in fact from the site. So they have been studied by botanists, and the botanists have given us complete history of agriculture in fact in the Indian subcontinent. So these are the crops which were introduced by the early farmers. And then of course the tool that you are seeing in fact, this is a sickle in fact which they develop for the harvesting purpose. So as per the need in fact they kept on changing the tool kit also. Then we see the introduction of some of the objects in fact which are required in fact for domestic activities. So these are some of the objects in fact which are used in their kitchen. So this is also developed. In the next level, you can see the difference in fact in the structural activities. They become more in fact now pronounced, and more in fact in developed form. So this development was happening gradually in fact and continuously up to the Harappan civilization, which happens around 2500 BC. So from 7000 BC to 2500 BC, there is a continuous development happening. So this is the kind of burials in fact. This is the kind of tradition that was introduced in the Indian subcontinent by the first farmers in this part. And right from beginning, of course, they believed in life after death. So here, you can see a lot of goods, in fact, which are buried along with the dead body, because they thought that there is a second life, and it needs all this in the second life. So we have this variety of crafts, variety of jewelry these people have produced. And certainly, we have very strong evidence about the manufacturing activity at the site, maybe trial and error method that they adopted. So we have that evidence in fact. So certainly, it is these early farmers, who have introduced these technologies in fact in this. Some more in fact, we are getting really and some of the raw materials that you see here in fact, it is not local in fact, coming from different far off places. So that shows in fact, people have really ventured out of South Asia, and they try to get the suitable raw material required for manufacturing these. So here, for example, these are the two kinds of shells in fact which are used for making ornaments. So one, maybe kind of variety in fact comes from the Karachi coast, scientifically established, and the other variety comes from the Oman coast. So this shows in fact, very strong the network. Same people, began to develop the pottery, and the pottery also we can see the gradual growth in that also. The early pottery is handmade, very crude, not well fired, and gradually there is a development in that. So this is the kind of burial in fact just before the Harappan culture. So that tradition was continuing in fact from the earliest levels to the Harappan levels. And then of course I come to the site of Rakhigarhi. As I said that this is the biggest Harappan city. This is the site which is protected by the Archaeological Survey of India as a national monument. Unfortunately, major part of the site is under modern occupation. The best part of the site, which we call as the citadel part, which was the most important part of the settlement. Now that part is under modern occupation, and we know that, that we will not be able to excavate that particular part because 10,000 people are living on that part. But here, the maps that we have generated, the gray portion indicates the area which is occupied today. But the entire site, entire area was the ancient site. People have dug, in fact, people have destroyed, major portion out of 550 hectare, nearly 500 hectare has been destroyed by the local people because, they wanted to convert these mounds into agricultural field. And in that process, they scooped out the entire, what we call as the habitation debris. And in that process, perhaps the biggest and the most important, heritage site in the country was in danger, in fact, before we started the work. Now, from this map, you can get right, in fact, the part of the site, which is quite intact, that you can see here. This is how, the ancient mounds look like. And these are all, in fact, man-made mound formed because of the human activities here. You can see part of the other, part of the site. There's some portion, which is left. So this, fortunately, this part is now protected by the Archaeological Survey of India. Close-up of that, the mound, you can see, in fact, quite, it has got a thick habitation deposit, nearly 25-meter deposit. No other Harappan site has such a thick deposit. And when we excavate there, in fact, you can see the section, in fact. We wanted to understand, the first step is to understand the entire history of the site. And in this, section, in fact, we could get proper evidence about the gradual growth of the Harappan civilization. We use two terms here. What is Harappan culture, which has a very long time span, from 5,500 BC up to 1500 BC. That is the time span of the Harappan culture. But there is one phase, most prosperous phase of the Harappan culture between 2500 BC to 1900 BC. That phase, in fact, is the phase of the urban phase of the Harappan culture. So that is called the Harappan civilization. So that Harappan civilization is also gradual growth, in fact, at the site. What is the kind of evidence that we are getting, in fact? Now, these type of structures are found in the lowermost levels. You won't be able to make out, but in the lowermost levels, there are some pits. And these pits were actually were occupied. We call them as pit dwellings. And one pit, of course, was not the entire household. In fact, there were clusters. In fact, 3 or 4 pits formed one cluster. And function of each pit was different. In fact, 1 or 2 were used for dwelling purpose, 1 for cooking, 1 for storage, like that. And then, of course, in the next stage, I will show you maybe the close-up of that. So we have the evidence from number of sites, in fact, showing the gradual growth from the pit dwellings to the well-planned settlement. So these type of pits, in fact, are found. And you can see the close-up of that. Some of them contain even fireplace inside. So they are very well made. The sides and the bottom are smoothened. And these are the pits which are found, in fact, in the lowermost levels. This is how the Harappans began their lifestyle, in fact, very modestly. In the second stage, of course, the structures are overground, but still, in fact, there are circular structures. One plan of the circular structure you can see here. And then, of course, what you are seeing here, in fact, these are the, in the ascending order, these are the floor levels of the rectangle structures. So in the third stage, they become the rectangular structures. And this is how the structures look like. So this is the beginning of the Harappan culture, maybe around 5,500 BC. And then, of course, you can see all the components. In fact, there is a, the bathing platform here. You can see the presence of the burnt bricks here. Typical Harappan building material now is being introduced now. And then, of course, there is a tandoor, in fact, which looks, the modern people have adopted this particular tandoor from the Harappans. And that one of the delicacies that the Harappans introduced, so popular in Punjab, is the tandoor chicken. We have actually the evidence of that. And these type of tandoors were used by the Arab. And in the next stage, of course, there is some kind of modicum planning. So this is the plan of the structure that I excavated in at Farmana. Now you can see maybe a street here and maybe small street structures on both sides. So this is the stage just before a full-fledged urbanization. And then, of course, you can see the full-fledged urbanization, a very well-planned cities. One of the most important contributions of the Harappans, we always talk about the important contribution made by the Harappans to the history of the nation and to the history of the world. And certainly we know that the Harappans are pioneer in fact in the, in the city building. They have taught in fact the world in fact how to build cities. And these cities, you'll be really surprised to see the evidence in fact in the cities. Maybe I'll show you sometimes. But this type of full place. So this is a gradual growth, which we are getting in fact at number of sites. And then of course, similar growth is also noticed in fact the ceramic also. The early ceramic, again, ceramic from the beginning of the Harappan culture is again coarse and little handmade. Some change happening in that as we come in the ascending order, and then it becomes a classical Harappan. So change in the maybe typology, in their maybe technology also, and this is how the full-fledged technology was developed in fact in the Harappan civilization phase, and that particular phase also is termed by archaeologists as the mature Harappan, because we see a lot of maturity in fact in the material culture as well as in the technology also. And then of course I come to the important part, the burial in fact. One of the aims of course was to get DNA from the Harappan skeletal remains. A very large area of the cemetery, maybe there were a number of maybe different localities of cemetery. We have not been able to, because usually the cemetery is located 1 kilometer away from the habitation, and the area around the site is always under cultivation. So a lot of evidence must have been wiped out. Fortunately, we found this because when we were excavating, the farmer in fact came to the site, and when he saw that we are collecting the potsherds, he said that he is getting the same kind of potsherds in fact in his field. And then we went there and then we discovered this cemetery. The precaution that we took, this precaution was not taken in fact before Rakhigarhi in fact. At Farmana we failed to do this. We never realized that we had to take this kind of precaution, because the DNA is so sensitive. The modern DNA can get into ancient DNA easily, and we need to prevent that. And secondly, the mistake that we did in fact at Farmana was that we always encourage people in fact from the village to come and see the excavation procedure and the evidence that that was excavated. And because of that, flocks of people used to come, and the samples got contaminated. Of course, that time, in 2008-9, it was very difficult to distinguish or separate the modern DNA from the ancient DNA. But now, of course, the techniques have been developed in which we can do that. So this, we use gowns and this type of precaution, proper precaution, and this is how all of us in fact worked. In fact, we excavated the burials very carefully by taking this kind of precaution. So we have three kinds of burials in fact. One is what we call as the primary burial, in which we get complete skeletal remain, like what you are seeing right here, down here. Then in some burials we have burial pots, burial goods, but few human bones. Probably the dead bodies were kept open for some time, and later the bones were collected and ceremoniously buried, like the Parsis do today in fact. And the third variety is that we call this as a symbolic burial, because in some burials we have only pots, burial goods, but no human bones at all. So probably the dead body could not be retrieved. Maybe he was killed by maybe wild animal or somewhere, but they thought of giving ceremonious burial to that person. So the primary burials are very important. These type of burials were used in fact for the reconstruction purpose. I am going to show that also. But some of the burials are really in a very good state of preservation. This is a couple burial. In fact, we published on paper saying that the concept of the couple was very much there in fact during the Harappan times. Probably the marriage maybe institutions were perhaps introduced mainly because these burials, this couple, they died simultaneously. We do not know the reasons for that, because we cannot detect any pathology, neither there are any injury marks on them. But they were buried in fact in a common cemetery meant for the common society, and they were buried with the full honor in fact, the honor that they gave to other maybe people also. So that means the relation between these two were perhaps maybe acceptable to the community, and therefore they were buried in a maybe community graveyard, not maybe away from the community graveyard. The close-up of that, some are really in a very good state of preservation. These are some of the different kinds So, the burial plots particularly, their number varies in fact from burial to burial. So that is also very important data for us because from that we can make out some maybe the difference in hierarchy, both in the social hierarchy as well as economic hierarchy. So that data is really used. Then we did a lot of sampling also. The Koreans in fact they could extract DNA from the parasite eggs also. And they have found in fact in Korea, in fact they have found the parasite eggs, and from the parasite eggs in fact they have identified the DNA of the person. So we also were looking in fact whether the parasite egg is survived, because in our body in fact in all of us body the parasite eggs are formed, and after the the body is buried in fact the body will disintegrate, but the parasite eggs will remain in fact they remain intact. So we are looking for that. Of course we did not get any evidence, but we did all samplings, very thorough samplings. And then of course when the samples were brought in fact to our laboratory, we took the same precaution as we did in fact for excavating them. And of course we did that all cleaning, and we made the samples ready for the sampling. And then of course we sent the samples to CCMB because you need a clean room for the sampling purpose, and CCMB had that. So this is a procedure that we followed for the analysis of the human. We did the anthropological examination. We have already published this report in PLOS ONE. Then of course CT scanning, which we have done in part. CT scanning data is really required for the facial reconstruction that we have used. Then the craniofacial reconstruction that we have already done, completed this particular part. And paleoparasitology, we tried that, of course, but we failed. Then of course we did the sampling for the ancient DNA. And also for stable isotope analysis, we wanted to find out what kind of food these people ate, whether they ate the local food, and what was the percentage of maybe plant food, animal food in their diet. So that all sorts of studies were done in fact. And this is that lady in fact which has given us the evidence of the DNA, very strong DNA. And we call this as Lady Luck for us. You can see here in fact the location of Rakhigarhi in Haryana. And then of course you see the location of Gonur in Turkmenistan. So Gonur, we had access to 3 skeletal remains. We studied them, we got the DNA from that skeletal remain. And in that particular skeletal remain, we found some maybe gene similar to the Harappans, probably the Harappan gene in fact in them. And then we analyzed 8 skeletal remains from the site of Shari Sokta in Iran, the early farming settlement in Iran, again contemporary to the Rakhigarhi or the Harappans. And there also in their skeletal remains, in fact, we found the Harappan genes. So probably the Harappans began to go out first, and then perhaps later there was reciprocal. Then the third evidence that we generated was the evidence of the facial features. In fact, we have reconstructed that. This is one male, in fact, 18 years old boy, and you can see the state of the preservation. And we have done this, we have reconstructed this, and this is a woman, in fact, which is around 45 years old. And we have used the CT scanning data. We have collected that. We have also collected the anthropological data from all the skeletal remains. And that data and the the CT scan data and the anthropological data was fed in fact in the computer. And then of course step by step, in fact, we first try to reconstruct the skull portion by using this data, and then slowly, in fact, we started putting layers of maybe muscle and at the end the skin. So this is how finally, in fact, this is how the Harappan people at Rakhigarhi. I don't claim that every human being in fact at Rakhigarhi was same like this. Maybe there were different groups, but some people at least they look like this. So this is a modern Haryana boy, looks exactly same like the Harappan, and you can see the Harappan lady, in fact, 45 years modern Haryana lady. They also, so this is also very important, where this also shows the continuity in the maybe the anatomical features of the people from the Harappan times to the modern times. And as I mentioned that right from the beginning, in fact, we know that there were people coming and going from different regions, so there was a lot of mixing happening, but that has not really affected the ancestry of the South Asians. And then quickly just I'll show you that, on the basis of, this archaeological data particularly, and also indicating that, there is a continuity, no people came from outside and established, maybe ancestry here. So on the basis of that, now we believe that perhaps, and there is a lot of information about the Vedic people, in fact, in the Rigvedic text. And we use, in fact, we have synthesized the textual data and the archaeological data to understand who are actually the Vedic people, whether we are getting any corresponding archaeological data for that. And when we try to locate the area of the Saraswati region on the basis of the description given in the text, we know that, that Saptasindhu area was the area of the Saraswati. And there is a mention about Himalaya and from where it is coming and its course. So we have traced that, on this, the scientists from ISRO, in fact, they have also used the satellite imagery photograph for, tracing this dry course of river. So here you can see the main river Saraswati, or today it is called as Ghaggar. And the moment it enters into Pakistan, it is called Hakra. And in Pakistan, in fact, in Bahawalpur district, it goes down and empties. In fact, it appears, in fact, in the Kutch part of Gujarat, where the site of Dholavira is located, and then meets the sea there. And then what you are seeing, in fact, here is the major tributary of the Saraswati called Drushyadwati. And the site of Rakhigarhi is located, in fact, in the Drushyadwati zone, not in the Saraswati. So we try to understand the archaeological data, in fact. What is the data, in fact, in the area which is maybe the area of the Saraswati? And there we found that, large number of, Harappan settlements only. We have some maybe, sprinkling of settlements of the later period, but they are not in a large number. And the text mentioned about, maybe different kinds of settlements in the Saraswati basin. So we have, in fact, the Harappan settlements have been identified, and also we have, established the typology of the settlements also. We have identified different categories of the settlement or the different hierarchy of the settlement. So that type of evidence, in fact, which corresponds well, in fact, with the description, that type of evidence is found. Then also there is a mention about the cities and towns located in the Saraswati basin. Not only agricultural settlements, not only maybe manufacturing centers, but also mention about the cities and towns, and highly fortified cities and towns have been mentioned, in fact, and we have maybe most of the cities. There are only 5 Harappan cities out of 2,000 settlements, but all the cities were highly fortified. We have the strong evidence of that. And then, of course, this you can see, this is the city of Dholavira. We call this as a stone city because entire city is made of stone. Perhaps the most maybe important and most magnificent city of the Harappans. Even though it is small in terms of size, it is much more bigger in terms of the architectural evidence than even Rakhigarhi and Mohenjo-daro. So very, very important site. And here, we have the evidence of the fortification, which is almost 18 meter wide, in fact, on top, and 25 meter at the base. And also there is a mention about the planning of the cities, in fact, in the text. Well planned, grid planned cities, and that is the evidence we are getting, in fact, in the Harappan levels. Also, there is a mention about the typical city is divided into 3 parts, and each part is properly maybe segregated and fortified. So the only evidence for that comes from the site of Dholavira. The site of Dholavira, the city of Dholavira, is divided into 3 parts, and this is the evidence which has been excavated. I think if you get an opportunity, you should visit this particular site, and you can really get the idea about whatever developments the Harappans had done, in fact, in the past. Then also there is a mention about the fire worship in the text, and the only evidence of that comes from the sites located in the Saraswati basin only, not outside the Saraswati basin. So we have this type of platforms on which there are maybe a number of maybe fire altars in them. Then also we have the different kinds of fire altars. The text also talks about the different shapes of the fire altars, like uni shape or the human shape fire altars, and exactly same kind of evidence is excavated from some of the sites. And these are some of the very well made these fire altars. And in situ, of course, they are very well made in a sense that they are lined with bricks. And in situ, we have maybe charred remains of wood and also animal bones. So this is a very strong evidence about the fire worship, in fact, present in the Harappan times. Then also, the text talks about the different kinds of maybe different orientation of the burials. The same orientation of the burials have been reported from the Harappan side. This is the picture of the cemetery at Farmana. Close up of that, this is the text also talks about the seafaring activities of the Vedic Aryans. The Vedic Aryans have been mentioned as the very adventurous, and they carried out a lot of seafaring activities. And in the Harappan levels, in fact, we have the evidence of these two kinds of boats. Perhaps the Harappans were pioneers. In fact, the Lothal site has perhaps the earliest dockyard anywhere in the world, dockyard cum port. And these are the depictions on the Harappan seals, depictions of the Harappan ships, two kinds of ships. One is the flat bottom plank, wooden plank boat, and exactly same boats are being used, in fact, in Pakistan. In fact, when I visited Mohenjo-daro, in the Indus River, in fact, I could see the replicas of the Harappan ships. And the other variety is called the reed boat, boats made from thick grass. And even today, in fact, these type of boats are made in Iraq. And both the boats were maybe ocean-going boats, because you can see a house inside and a bird. When you are taking a maybe such kind of deep sea journey, you need birds to locate the land. You need the facility like that. In both, there is a facility. So there is a corresponding evidence in this respect also. Then, of course, there's a mention about the meditation and the yoga tradition, in fact. These are the, we have the evidence about this also. These are the different terracotta figurines found from the different Harappan sites, showing in different maybe yoga posture, in fact. So certainly the pioneers were the Harappans, and then of course the yoga science is so important that this is considered the best gift of India to the world, and that comes from the Harappan times. Also, there are maybe we do not have any evidence for the Vedic god as such, because most of them were worshipped, in fact, in the form of nature. But this one god, in fact, which Wheeler say that this god is a Dravidian god, the Shiva. But you know that this particular god is quite prominently worshipped all over the country. We don't find any divide, in fact, North India or South India, everywhere, in fact, this god is. Perhaps this was the universal god, in fact, in India during the Harappan times. The only evidence which is debated, we have very strong, very small evidence, the evidence of the horse, because Aryans and horse go hand in hand. And these are some of the bones. There is a lot of argument happening. These are the bones, which are from one side called Surkotala, which is close to Dholavira in Kutch part of Gujarat. And these bones were studied by two different groups of archaeozoologists. One headed by one of the topmost archaeozoologists from Hungary, Bocconi, Professor Bocconi, and he has identified these bones as the bones of the domesticated horse. And the same bones were studied later by Richard Meadow from Harvard University. And he refutes, and he says that these are not the bones of domesticated horse, but they are the bones of wild donkey or wild ass. So here the scientific community is divided, but we have some more evidence, in fact, from the site of Mohenjo-daro and also from Lothal. There are some figurines, terracotta figurines, which have bushy tail, and they have been identified as the horse figurines. So probably we don't have sufficient evidence, but we are looking for this. Also, there is a mention about the chariots. We do not have any evidence of the chariots, of course, in the Harappan times. But these are some of the terracotta wheels. These are not the wheels of the bullock cart. They are not the bullock cart wheels. But they have the hubs. Probably these look like the wheels of the chariot. So we do not know whether chariot was present, but this is a strong indication. Wheeler, in fact, now based his hypothesis on the basis of this particular evidence. He said that the Harappans were Dravidian. Maybe these people created the Aryan and Dravidian maybe divide. And they say that the Aryans came from outside. They destroyed the cities, Harappan cities, and they destroyed one of the maybe iconic cities like Mohenjo-daro, and these skeletal remains which are lying in fact in the street, in the upper part of the street. He said that these are the people in fact who were killed by the invading Aryans. But later these skeletal remains were studied by physical anthropologists, one of the topmost physical anthropologists of the world, Kenneth Kennedy from US. And he said that these people did not die in any kind of battle or war, because there is no injury marks on their body at all. Probably they died because of maybe some kind of epidemic, or they died because of the suffocation, because they were found in fact in the flood deposit. And the site of Mohenjo-daro is located in fact on the bank of river Indus, and Indus has a history of the frequent floods. So the last flood happened in fact. There are two events in fact happened before the last maybe last event. But that time the Harappan economy was booming in fact. They were developing into cities and towns. So that time they could reconstruct the city. But the last event in fact happened when the Harappan economy was declining. So these people may have died in fact there. And then of course after the decline, people have spread in fact. How that the continuity has happened in fact in the Indian subcontinent. The Harappan influence is found in fact from Harappan region to up to Bengal, because we have documented that in fact in the archaeological data, and up to South India, up to Tamil Nadu in fact we can see the Harappan influence all over the Indian subcontinent, because after the decline people have started spreading in fact out in different parts of the country, and they got mixed up with the local population, and there probably they kept alive the Harappan maybe technology and Harappan tradition. That is how there's a continuity from the Harappan times to the modern times. And then of course the cities were broken, the urban phase was broken, and again they reverted back to the rural phase. And then of course these are the different local cultures that came into existence. So this is in short in fact I have already spoken about this. In last 12,000 years, no change in the ancestry of the people of South Asia. Anatomical similarity from Harappan to the present times. Most of the developments such as domestication, settled way of life, village life, city life, etc. happened indigenously. Neither steppe ancestry nor ancient Iranian former ancestry in the South Asian population in the early stage. New light on the Aryan invasion, theory and Vedic people. Most of the South Asians are descendants of the Harappans. Now this is my hypothesis that possibly Harappan spoke in Proto-Indo-European language, maybe early form of Sanskrit, because we do not know when the Indo-European language really originated, where exactly it originated. Maybe Sonal will correct me. But since the Harappans were so advanced, they were maybe adventurous people in fact, moving out of Indian subcontinent and carrying out trade with maybe international community. Perhaps they needed language, they needed script. And who knows, perhaps these are the people. This is the hint in fact, this is not the conclusion. I am working on this particular aspect also. So there's quite likely that these are the people who developed the early form of Sanskrit, which is considered to be the base of the Indo-European language. So that is one, the implying gen flow from South Asia into Syarishokta and Gonur, a strong case to suggest out of India movement. And we want to work now. The data that, as I say, that it's very limited. We want to generate more data from the site of Rakhigarhi itself first, so that we can study the composition of the human population there. And then of course we have the Harappan populations in different ecological zones, different geographical zones. So we want to maybe collect samples from different geographical zones and want to understand this population. And at this stage we cannot really generalize on the basis of very, very small data. But only thing that we can generalize that we can talk about the Indian ancestry and the continuity of that from this. And then of course out of Harappan region also there were a number of contemporary cultures, and they had very strong interaction with the Harappans. So we would like to know the relation between the Harappans and the contemporary population. So these are our, and we want to get data from all the Neolithic, Chalcolithic sites, even megalithic sites. So how the continuity in fact was there in fact in the Indian subcontinent. So the basic research of course was done in fact when I was in Deccan College. So naturally this is the research which could be done only in a place like Deccan College, which has got fantastic infrastructure and the facilities. Then, of course, the Haryana State Department of Archaeology, Archaeological Survey of India were also part of this research, and we were supported by Indian Council of Historical Research. And we certainly thank the people of Rakhigarhi because of the support, local support, that we could carry out this type of research. So thank you very much. This is the kind of research that we are doing, and certainly there may be some questions that I'll be happy to receive questions from you.